69, don't say it, we see a TV ad.
What is up, my boys and girls? We've got a new one for y'all today, and today we got Captain America: A History of Blech. I should restart. A History of Resistance by Sir Superhero. So, I am maining Captain America. Well, I used to main. I'm playing Captain America. I'm trying to lord him next on Marvel Rivals, so I need to learn the lore. I need to know deep about Captain America, because I'm gonna be real, all the MCU movies and some of the comics, I really didn't like them like that. But I'm willing to learn and figure out the lore for him. So you guys already know, like, sub, all that jazz. Let's get straight to it and follow the original creators.
A quote from Steve Rogers, Captain America, circa 1974. Lord knows the decision I make here tonight will certainly affect the world as much as it affects me. But I'm the one who has to be or not be Captain America, the one who makes him live or die. And I'm the one who's seen everything Captain America fought for become a cynical sham. I've asked myself if Captain America must die, and if I had the courage to carry out my verdict. The answer to both questions is yes. What a way to start a video. Happy Flag Day, everybody, let's go! Look, Captain America is a character who is very often misinterpreted. People often characterize him as a super cop or a pawn of the American government, and to be honest, that usually tips me off that these people have not read a lot of Captain America comics. This video is called Captain America: A History of Resistance, and I am going to make good on that title. The values of Steve Rogers are pretty obvious. He tells them to the reader very openly, very often. The video started with a quote, and you're going to hear a lot more of them as we keep going. And, well, given that, I don't want to spend much more time on an intro. I have things to say today, and so we should just get right into them. We're going to start things off with a very brief overview on Captain America's origin. Now, I think most of us have a good idea of this already, but we will be referencing things from it later in the video, so a refresher course is a good idea. Stephen Grant Rogers was born in 1922, making him a young man in the early 40s during the events of World War II. Steve attempted to join the army because he wanted to fight the Nazis, however he was ineligible due to a whole lot of health issues.
Fuck, what? Okay, sorry, my mic was a little too loud. What though? My boy Rogers wanted to just start killing Nazis? That's crazy work.
He did end up receiving the experimental super soldier serum treatment instead, becoming Captain America, and I mean, we've all seen how that one went.
What the fuck? Wait, what the fuck? What is this? Is this canon? Did Cap actually beat Hitler? Is this what the government's hiding from me? Is this what history books are lying to me about? It really wasn't him killing himself, it was fucking Captain America? That's crazy.
Captain America did quite a bit during this World War II era. The character was very popular and even ran with his own superhero team called the Invaders, but that's a story for another time, perhaps. Eventually, after the war was over, the popularity of the character declined and his book was cancelled. Cap was completely irrelevant for a period of several years until 1964, in the pages of a new comic, something people had never seen before, a little title known as The Avengers. I wonder if it'll catch on someday. Avengers issue 4 is where Captain America makes his reappearance, and this is also the comic that introduces the whole frozen in ice thing. That was not how the character's story had ended in his previous book, that was just how Avengers explained his absence for a while. So yes, comics have been doing weird retcons like this all the way back to the 60s. So now we're at the status quo of Captain America that is most often referenced in pop culture. I told you this recap was going to be brief, and I meant it. During the period right after Avengers issue 4, Captain America was an Avengers character and nothing else. He was there as a gimmick almost, saying, hey, look at this cool character from 20 years ago, he's back now, isn't that neat? However, Steve was really popular and remained a core member of the Avengers for several years until splitting off to get his own solo series in 1960.
I'm gonna be real. I don't know how people... Is that Black Panther? I thought that nigga was Batman for a second. What the fuck? I never liked Captain America's design. So
The 8.
yeah.
Now, there's a very, very, very important thing to note about Captain America's reappearance era during the 60s. At this time, he was not a government agent in any capacity. He was in the...
Okay, bro. Why is bro telling me like this? He was not a government agent for what? Like what? You trying to beam this shit into my eyes, into my mind, bro? Like fucking Mr. Krabs flipping the TV on that one guy.
40s and 50s, of course, he was a soldier, but after being presumed dead for many years, the government wasn't exactly writing him paychecks. Foreshadowing. Sorry, something stuck in my throat there. As I said just a second ago, Steve was an Avenger, both in terms of his publication and in-universe. He was on good terms with the government at least, frequently teaming up with Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D., but he was independent. Even when he was operating on his own or with a not government-sanctioned team like the Avengers, the government didn't really bother him because he was good at what he did. Everybody liked Steve Rogers, and he was very effective at being a hero, and when he was doing all this literally decked out head to toe in American symbols, that wasn't a problem for anybody.
He does not have that shit on, bro. That shit is buns, bro. Bro got the red fucking slipper fucking shoes, bro. What are those? That is crazy work.
So, Steve did his thing and helped people out as best as he could, which would be the status quo for many years. His relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. remained generally positive. He met many of allies along the way, including his longtime friend the Falcon, and this is how things would remain, until 1973. In Captain America issue 169, don't say it, we see a TV advertisement, and you know what? I'm just gonna do a dramatic reading of this. Good day, my fellow Americans. This is a man many of you know, Captain America. For years, Captain America has been a one-man vigilante committee, attacking anyone he deemed a criminal. Some were clearly such, but others were private citizens, men that the recognized legal agencies had never molested. In fact, recognized legal agencies are hardly ever involved in Captain America's headlong pursuit of his individual concept of law and order.
Did it just say molested? In fact, highly involved. I must be tripping.
He is unwell in America. Molested were private citizens, men that...
No, they did. But as were private citizens, the regular... That's crazy.
The record of law and order. He is unwelcome, for example, at S.H.I.E.L.D. Who is Captain America? He wraps himself in our nation's proud flag, yet no one in our government is responsible or will take responsibility for his actions. Perhaps the reason for this lies in chemicals, which many rumors allege created his unnatural abilities in a secret laboratory. Yet he continues to roam the streets, striking at will at those who displease him. He claims he does it all for America. Your America? Now, there's a couple problems with this. One, that's absolutely not how people talked in the 1970s. I know, but I did it anyway because it was funny. Two, the much bigger problem, this advertisement is clearly sensationalized. Steve himself says as much, and the comic actually gives us citations so that we can look for ourselves. The so-called private citizen that he's punching here, yeah, that guy is absolutely a supervillain. And in this shot where he's breaking through a police barricade, he's doing so to catch an imposter of himself. So who on earth put this advertisement out? Well, they identify themselves right at the end of it. This was paid for by a group called the Committee to Regain America's Principles, and
I was gonna say, is fucking Jameson again? Bro hating on America, fucking Captain America next? That would have been funny.
yeah, that absolutely sounds like a real political action group. I mean, aside from the fact that the acronym is crap, if I heard this in a commercial, I would not bat an eye. This little negative PR campaign that Crap put out did definitely damage Captain America's reputation a little bit, but it was not enough to destroy it. Unfortunately, they were not done at the TV ads. The committee's plan against Steve escalates to the point where they successfully frame him for murder. This is enough to turn the public against him entirely, so the committee can enact Phase 2, because by pure coincidence, I'm sure, there's another superhero rising to prominence at the same time. This is Moonstone, a regular guy who was given superhuman abilities when he fused with a magic rock from space.
That's the gayest name I've ever heard. Bro pulls up, has like a villain of the week he fucks with. Meh, 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 meh. I'm robbing this bank. Bro falls in. Stop right there. Oh, if it isn't my so stupid. If it isn't my old friend, Moonstone. It's a stupid name.
Which weirdly is true. You'd expect that would be part of the front, but no, the magic space rock is real. His heroic identity, though, is less than accurate, not that the public is aware of this at first. See, when Captain America is revealed as a horrible murderer, Moonstone is so appalled by his actions that he joins the committee in order to counteract everything that Captain America has done. Now, at this point, I think we can all guess that crap was... it was what it said on the tin, and there were actually a group of supervillains behind it. Steve is broken out of prison and learns that the actual force behind the Committee to Regain America's Principles is a group called the Secret Empire. The Secret Empire was actually not...
I had a joke, then lost it.
Not a new villain group for this comic. They've been around in Marvel for a while, and even in this story, they had a couple different facets of their plan operating at once. One of these other operations involved kidnapping and exploiting a bunch of mutants, leading Captain America and Falcon to team up with the X-Men. Thus, with a whole bunch of superheroes rallied, it was time for the final showdown with the Secret Empire. The Empire's plan is actually relatively simple at this stage. Now that Captain America has been discredited and branded a criminal, and Moonstone is America's new favorite superhero, the Empire is going to dramatically land this UFO thing on the White House lawn and proclaim that they are the new rulers of the nation. Then Moonstone is going to show up to save the day and, for lack of a better term, throw the entire match. He gets his ass absolutely handed to him in a 100% staged fight, at which point he says that there's nothing he can do and America should probably just surrender because the Secret Empire will unleash worse weaponry if they don't. All of these stages of the plan actually go off without a hitch, and Moonstone gets the entire...
This is some Power Ranger ass fucking plan, bro. What the fuck is this?
Speech out, but then of course Captain America shows up at just the right moment. Moonstone gets beaten for real this time, and then in the aftermath of the fight, the leader of the committee steps out to try and quote-unquote set things right. Stereotypical political saving face thing, he was going to try and blame Moonstone for everything, claim that he was the real mastermind and the committee was all being strung along with his plans. But Moonstone is incredibly petty about the whole thing and goes, no, 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 I work for you, I've always worked for you, there's no way of getting out.
No, that is valid as fuck. That is valid as fuck. I'll crash out too. Throw one of my Moonstones at him. Call that shit a kidney stone.
Out of this one. And since the Secret Empire's plan was tricking the entire nation into surrendering all at once, you better believe they made sure this was on live TV. And with Moonstone's confession going out to everybody, the plan was pretty done. Despite the failure, not all of Secret Empire has been captured, though. The organization's leader, a man simply known as Number One up to this point, is still around, and attempts to flee during the chaos by running across the lawn into the White House. Steve notices, chases the guy down, eventually tackles him and rips off his mask, revealing...
It's Epstein, bro.
Well, this is where things are going to get interesting.
Oh my god.
We see the actual unmasking of the villain and Captain America's stunned reaction, but for the remainder of the page, Number One's face is always shown just out of frame. He does give us some information, though. We know that the real identity of Number One is someone with high political office, because he says that he had high political office and that did not satisfy him. This could have been a cabinet member under the mask, it could have been the vice president, it could have even been the president of the United States, though we'll never know for sure. However, there is some dialogue earlier in this arc that gives us hints. Watergate is brought up, and also this comic was published during the time of Richard Nixon's presidency. So while I cannot nail this down for 100% certain, I can definitely say that it's quite possible this Captain America villain was actually real-world US President Richard Nixon. And as for why I
What?
can never know
I'm not political or anything like that, so I know who Richard Nixon is, I just don't know what he does.
for sure, you might have caught a minute ago, I said that his face is shown off frame for the rest of this page. I chose that word very specifically because whoever number 1 was, he shoots himself 3 panels after his unmasking. Richard Nixon or not, this whole incident has some serious effects on Captain America. After number 1's demise by his own hand, the next panels of the comic are just Cap in a fugue state leaving the White House and walking away, and then the issue is over, leading us to Captain America number 176, one of the most important in this entire video. This comic is one of the most vital to the entire history of Steve Rogers as a character, and Steve Englehart, the writer of the book, evidently knew that right from the jump, as on page 1 of this comic we can read this blurb, quote, "When they talk about Cap classics in the years to come, this is one of the ones they'll mention first." And yeah, I mean, I'm doing that right now. Captain America 176 does not have a villain, and it does not have a single fight scene. Instead, the entire issue is Captain America giving an introspection on what he thinks his role means, as well as having discussions about it with many of his friends and allies. Now, I'm not going to read you this whole thing, but if there is a single comic that I recommend you go check out for yourself after this video, it is this one. The comic is not subtle in the slightest. It has a message it wants to convey, and it wears that message plainly. If you don't believe me, this is a real unedited panel. But the comic is not gung-ho yay
That is
America. In
crazy.
fact, it's kind of the polar opposite of that. This panel is Steve mourning what his America used to be. This is the ideal that he stood for, freedom and equality for everybody, as well as standing up against tyranny who would try and oppose that.
Okay, no, that actually makes sense. I was about to say what the fuck that means, but that actually makes sense.
But now, he's not so sure about that anymore. And for good reason, I would say. After all, Steve had just found out that the President of the United States, probably, as well as a major political action committee, were just involved in a straight-up plot to overthrow the United States and install a dictator. That is not what Steve stands for. It's never what he stood for, even back decades before when he had signed up to fight the Nazis. Steve Rogers and Captain America were for America as a people, not America as a government. In his own words, "Over the years, I've done my best. I wasn't perfect, I did things I'm not proud of, but I always tried to serve my country well. And now I find that the government was serving itself." Even though Steve at the time was not a government agent and had not been one for decades, he was still running around wearing the American flag. And in this moment, the symbolism of that flag, when America was showing corruption at the very top, was not one that Steve could in good conscience represent. So, he leaves. Steve Rogers.
Dang, that's crazy. That's valid though. That is actually completely valid. I would do the same thing. Like, cause like shit, America's not gonna. Hold on, this lore's actually going crazy.
Rogers hangs up the title of Captain America and walks away, proving for the first time, as will be proven many more times, that Steve Rogers is not loyal to America as a government, he is loyal to the ideals of what it's supposed to be. Now, if you think that Steve Rogers abandoning his superhero career because of this is a little bit of an overreaction, don't worry, it's not one that lasts. Steve is retired for about 3 issues, and then he comes back in a big new way. After some encouragement from former Avengers teammate Hawkeye, Steve starts designing a new superhero identity for himself, and decides to be pretty obvious with its meaning. Steve is so disgusted with the corruption in the American government that he builds his new superhero around that idea. Quoting a few things from this issue, "Nuts to the whole blamed Washington crew, they've had their version of America and I've had mine, but I won't have to be associated with theirs anymore." He later straight up refers to himself as a man without a country, and this is the thing that gives him the name he ends up landing on. Steve Rogers is Captain America no more, and this is the origin of the Nomad.
What the the fuck?
America
Hold
no
on.
more, and this is the origin of the Nomad.
Nomad. I'm not gonna lie. This shit is burgers, bro. This shit is burger water, bro. This shit is ass. What is this? The Nomad? I feel like your shit should have went. Maybe we don't get the V-neck to all the way down to your fucking pants, and this would be a crazy fit if you didn't have the V-neck all the way down to your fucking pants.
As the Nomad, Steve Rogers does the exact same stuff that he was doing before, which is an incredibly important point when it comes to this character. Nomad was not a shift in Steve's ideals. He still believed for freedom and equality for everybody, and that's what he was fighting for. He was simply distancing himself from a symbology that didn't support him. In fact, the biggest change to Captain America's actual fights as the Nomad was that he very briefly had a cape in this costume, which he added just because he thought it looked cool, and then later in this same issue, he trips on it because he's not used to fighting with a cape, and then just tears it off, and Nomad doesn't have a cape anymore. That's not really relevant to the point of this video, but it was...
Bro, that is not the method. What he should have done was get like a half cape. Don't get a long ass cape. You gotta get the half capes, or you get a long cape and get it tattered up at the bottom where it's hanging, Fortnite style. You feel me? And then you got yourself a cape that looks cool.
Absolutely worth mentioning because Steve is great. Steve continued fighting crime as the Nomad for several issues, but while this was going on, the world was not without a Captain America. Several other people picked up the title in Steve's absence, though none of them had his direct blessing as they were doing it. That is, until the third interim Captain America. Yes, there were 3 of them in rapid succession, and the last was named Roscoe Simons. Roscoe was actually pretty worthy of the role. He was a regular man with no superpowers, but he was an accomplished athlete, helped out by the fact that he was trained by the Falcon. So things were working out, actually. Steve Rogers was the Nomad doing what he had been doing for decades prior, and the world had a new Captain America to look to. At least for a couple of issues until things took a very, very dark turn. As is expected for pretty much every incarnation of Captain America, Roscoe eventually had to fight the Reds.
Jesus, look at bro. Bro is terrified. Like, bro, ugh. I've never seen a face like that. Like, that is some... but Roscoe must have made him shit himself, bro. Bro turned him, like... Bro made him go on the back of the bus. The small bus, specifically.
Skull, and when Red Skull realized that the nemesis he was doing battle with was not actually Steve Rogers and was instead some young upstart, he tortured Roscoe to death.
Goddamn!
Steve, unsurprisingly, felt no small measure of guilt for this.
Damn. Comics are grim back then.
Incident, enough that it caused him to have a realization. Captain America was a symbol, and it was one that people needed. In his brief stint as the Nomad, 3 separate people all took on the identity for themselves, and one of them got themselves killed in the process. Steve did not want that to happen to any more people, but it was going to happen because the world was always going to need a Captain America. So Steve took it upon himself to be that Captain America once again.
This is a better fit. I'm gonna be real. Better than the V-neck. Better than the V-neck fucking all the way down to your pants shirt, bro.
Abandoning the Nomad identity and taking up the shield once more. But make no mistake, as the comic itself says, Steve Rogers had not gone in a circle. This Steve was the Sentinel of Liberty era, a time when Captain America actively did not...
Like, look at this. You got your whole chest exposed. I don't know what you were fighting in this, but you got clawed and they missed the one part that was open.
...stand with the American government, but instead stood for American ideals. As you will see a million more times today, Steve is not subtle about this either. Quote, God, I'm glad I get to quote him directly so many times, "You made me remember what was important about this country, Skull. The dream it was built on, not the deadwood thrown on top." Steve was still not an official government agent during this period, arguably less so. If there were any threats to American ideals, the real American ideals of equality and freedom for all, Steve was going to fight against them, whether they came from outside or within. Unsurprisingly, not everybody liked this. Enter Act 2 of this arc, the Commission on Superhuman Activities. The CSA would make their debut in 1985, several years after the whole Nomad thing, though they would first appear in an X-Men book, not a Captain America one. This is due to the fact that the CSA was very heavily anti-mutant, which tracks given that the real goal of the organization was essentially just to make sure that America had control over as much superhuman activity on their soil as they possibly could.
I still found that crazy. like that's insane. They really treat people niggas that was born with their powers differently than people who was given them.
And the mutants weren't so easy to control. Steve was not involved in CSA stuff at their inception, largely because he didn't know that they existed. The Avengers did briefly clash with some CSA agents in one annual issue, but they didn't know exactly who they were working for or what the shady stuff behind the scenes was. That information would be conveyed in 1987, when the Commission on Superhuman Activities tried to get their hooks into Captain America as well. I've said this several times at this point, but I do want to say it again. Captain America was not a federal agent at this time. He had not been since his reappearance in the 60s, and in this post-Nomad era, he was farther away from that than he had ever been, and the government did not like that fact. So, they found a loophole. Remember when I coughed about foreshadowing quite a while ago? Yeah, time to bring that back into the fold. Sometime shortly before the arc we're currently discussing, the American government did something very nice for Steve and paid him a substantial chunk of money. Why on earth would they do that? Well, technically, he had never resigned or been discharged from the military back in the 40s when he went into the ice. Therefore, he was owed back pay. Thus, Steve Rogers received about $1 million to his name, and that's $1 million in 80s money too, which I don't want to work out the inflation calculator because I don't have an exact figure, but it's quite a bit. Now, Steve, being Steve, did not spend this money on himself. Instead, he used all of it to create a nationwide computer hotline through which people could report emergencies to himself and the Avengers. So there you go. If anyone ever wants to say that Steve Rogers doesn't support grassroots community initiatives, there you go. But why does this matter for the arc we're talking about? Why does Steve receiving a large check and then using that to support the community mean something for this discussion? Well, blackmail, baby. Of course it's blackmail. Eventually, Steve is...
Who doesn't like blackmail? Seeing that nigga go into the mailbox, putting my shit in there, scared he's gonna steal it. Motherfucker.
And before the Commission on Superhuman Activities, and while Steve does not know what this group is specifically, he does recognize some of them as established members of the government. And then they basically tell him, hey Steve, you work for us now. There's a lot of very long-winded legal speak in these pages, which I will put on the screen now if you would like to read for yourself, but to summarize, they tell him, hey, you signed up for the Super Soldier program, you signed a contract. As part of that contract, you work for us, we gave you the Captain America suit, we provided you the shield, and since you were never technically declared legally dead, that contract still holds. Then when Steve tells them no, and very reasonably questions why...
Basically what bro's saying is, you are mine! You are mine! That's what he's saying.
Why they're just bringing this up now after he's been unfrozen for years, they bring up his taxes. Turns out that the back pay Steve had received was not credited to him, it was credited to Captain America. And since he was not serving the federal government as Captain America during this interim, it was an error, and the government was within their legal right to ask for that large sum of money back. Now, the CSA didn't actually want their money back.
Shit, I would've said, look at my American balls, nigga. You ain't gonna do shit. The fuck y'all gonna do? Let's be real.
That would be absurd. But they did absolutely see this as an opportunity to make Steve Rogers work off his debt, therefore making Captain America a direct government operative once again. Steve is given 1 day to decide his response, which leads to another comic, Captain America issue 332, full of great Captain America speeches. He says that these bureaucrats do not represent the real America, they represent its politics, not the intangibles of liberty, justice, dignity, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not even the end of it, as Steve then goes on to make his position even more obvious, saying, quote, "By going back to my wartime role as a glorified agent of America's official policies, I'd be compromising my effectiveness as a symbol that transcends mere politics." God, Steve Rogers is based. And after a lot of philosophical debate, Steve...
I was about to say something about our government and shit, or something like that. Not like government, but like politics, like with the president and stuff. But I'm not doing that. I'm not going to talk about any of that.
Reaches his decision, and just, I have to read you this entire page. It's a lot of dialogue, but it is 100% worth it. "Gentlemen, I have given the matter we discussed yesterday a great deal of thought, and I regret to say that in all good conscience I cannot accept your conditions of employment. Captain America was created to be a mere soldier, but I have made him far more than that. To return to being a mere soldier would be a betrayal of all that I've striven for the better part of my career. To serve the country your way, I would have to give up my personal freedom and place myself in a position where I might have to compromise my ideals to obey your orders. I cannot represent the American government. The president does that. I must represent the American people. I represent the American dream, the freedom to strive to become all that you dream of being. Being Captain America has been my American dream. To become what you want me to be, I would have to compromise that dream, abandon what I have come to stand for. My commitment to the ideals of this country is greater than my commitment to a 40-year-old document. I am sorry, but that's the way it must be. Gentlemen, I believe these are yours." And then Steve Rogers walks away, leaving his costume and his shield on the table behind him.
Oh, boy, cat! Oh my god, oh my god, this is making me open my eyes to Captain America. I'm gonna be so real.
So, where do we go from here? There's no more Captain America, and you better believe the government is raging mad about it. Interestingly, this is where the video is going to turn into some stuff that's a little bit more known to the general public. Steve is out, and while we get to see where he's going in just a minute, the next issue of the comic is less about him. Instead, it is about the CSA trying to find a new Captain America. They go through a couple different candidates.
And this is probably when Bucky's gonna, come into the play.
But eventually decide on promoting an existing superhero, a nut job named the Super Patriot, real name John Walker. Yeah, we all know that guy at this point, and in the comics, his storyline is even more politically charged than in the movies. He does not become Cap because of Steve's death.
Imagine a crippled guy being named John Walker. Imagine being a doctor having to pull bro in. John Walker, just a wheelchair, bro. I don't know why that would be funny.
Or disappearance, he gets the role after Steve Rogers chooses to resign rather than become a puppet of a self-serving government. John operates as Captain America for several issues, like several of the main self-titled Captain America issues, though he's dubious at best as a protagonist, and Steve is still doing things during these. When Steve is ready to get back into the costumed superhero fold again, he does so with yet another new identity. Not as Nomad this time. In fact, Steve passed that role to another guy quite a while ago, and he's still using it. Now, that Nomad, Jack Mon...
Is that Daredevil? That has to be Daredevil. I was about to say, is that the Big D? Because it's just a Big D on his shirt, bro. They call bro the Big D around here. Some people are in like a little, like some bad guys are in an alley. Hey, did you get the drugs? Yeah, I did. But that guy, Big D. Bro, that's so funny.
Monroe does offer to give the No Man title back to Steve, but no, that's not what he's doing this time. Steve doesn't want to be the man without a country again. He has learned the importance of that Captain America symbolism, and that's not something he's going to abandon, even when his government is abandoning him. But also, there's a court injunction against the red, white, and blue costume. He legally cannot do that, or he'll get in even more trouble. So, he tries another option. This time, Steve Rogers is not the Nomad, but he's also not Captain America. Now, Steve Rogers is simply the Captain. The identity of the Captain stuck
I'm gonna be so, I don't know. Seems like just a Canadian Captain America, bro.
Around for a little bit longer than Nomad did. Steve even led a short-lived incarnation of the Avengers while wearing this suit, but eventually the period had to come to an end, and it did so with a bang. After some time, the Commission on Superhuman Activities was dissolved when it was revealed that a large portion of it was being manipulated by the Red Skull, which at this point should not surprise anybody, I guess. The presence of Red Skull ends up attracting both Steve as the Captain and John Walker as Captain America to the same fight, and at this point the two make up their differences and finish off Skull's plot for good. Then, since Walker is not the best at his job and Steve Rogers is clearly still doing stuff in full form, the government offers Steve the Captain America title back. He can wear the costume again, he can call himself Captain America, he can use the classic shield, all of those good things, and Steve tells them thanks, but no thanks. As we have learned, Steve Rogers is based, and he straight up tells the committee that he's talking to, with all due respect, I appreciate what you've just told me, but I do not want them back. I have learned these past months that I can serve my ideals, the ideals of this great country, even without that uniform. And then in one of the coolest moments, he simply says, I'll be in touch, and walks out of the room. Now, to be fair, this is
You know what? I'm not gonna lie. I want that in the game. I want that suit in the game. I'd wear that.
Still the last issue of Steve Rogers' time as the Captain. He does take on the Captain America identity in just 2 short pages, but not because he's accepting the government's offer. He does this because after he leaves the room, John Walker runs after him and says, hey, no, you gotta do this. John just straight up acknowledges that he's not very good at being Captain America, and also makes the point that if Steve rejects the title, the government's just going to get somebody else to do it again, and chances are they will not be as responsible with it as Steve is. And so, acknowledging the validity of this argument, Steve is back as Captain America. Though, as I'm sure many of you have already noticed, this would not be the last that we would see of the Captain's uniform, as this exact black Captain America suit is what John Walker would wear in his time as the US agent, which I like a lot. This is good symbolism for him trying to live up to that role of Captain America, even if he's not going to do it perfectly. So with that, we are back to Captain America's most common status quo, which is as a symbol of America, but American ideals, not American politics. And this is what he would remain as for a while afterwards. The next several arcs are Captain America with the Avengers again, and then US agent stuff.
Again, what is with these faces?
The next several arcs are Captain America with the Avengers again, and then US.
Like, bro, devious ass smile, bro. Bro looks like he's about to tickle my booty in a second. Like, what is bro? you is not back, cuz I'm gonna be real. You's getting right back out.
US agent stuff, and then this happens. I mean, it is still comic books. He's not going to be fighting corrupt governments every issue. And from this point on, there actually wouldn't be too much Captain America versus government stories for several decades. Of course, his relationship with the government, and S.H.I.E.L.D. especially, would come up on a semi-regular basis, but that was true of both him and the Avengers as a whole. A lot of you can probably take a guess at what the next big Captain America versus the government storyline is, but I do briefly want to shout out the New Avengers in 2005 because there is some good stuff there. This New Avengers was actually the reforming of the team after they had disbanded in the Avengers Disassembled event, and there's a nice shot towards the beginning of this series where Cap and Tony are talking about reforming the team, and when Cap says that it might be rough because of the politics, Steve Rogers just straight up says, no more politics, just us. No UN, no governments, just us helping people that need help. The big problems. So once again, his stance is just obviously clear. At this point, half an hour into the video, this should not be news, but the reason that I want to point it out specifically is that it gives us an interesting piece of information on Cap's relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, which is basically that S.H.I.E.L.D. has given up and lets him do anything that he wants. New Avengers confirms that Steve Rogers technically does have an official status at S.H.I.E.L.D. This status is something called the Full Champion License, and it gives him complete authority to organize any team for any mission that he sees fit. This does not mean that he is part of S.H.I.E.L.D., to be clear. The comic explicitly says that several times. What it does mean is that even S.H.I.E.L.D. knows that controlling Steve Rogers is such a futile thing that they've basically put a little flag on his S.H.I.E.L.D. data profile that says they shouldn't even bother trying. This would be a pretty short-lived status though, as those of you who know your comics history know what happened about a year later. It's time to talk about something that everyone knew we were going to be talking about right from the jump: Civil War. I'm going to begin this section with a comparison to the Civil War movie, because for those of you who are newer to the comics space, the Civil War comics started for a very different and far darker reason. The core of the conflict is actually the same in both forms. Captain America and Iron Man, leading two sides of superheroes, split on some sort of superhuman government control. In the movie, it's the Sokovia Accords, and in the comics, it's something called the Superhuman Registration Act. The biggest difference comes in the form of what caused those acts to be proposed. And seriously, when I said this was dark a second ago, I was not kidding. The comics started with a really serious thing. The inciting incident for the comic begins with a team called the New Warriors. The New Warriors were odd for a superhero team because they were also reality TV stars. They were a bunch of young heroes who would catch villains and save people, but they filmed the entire thing, though they didn't necessarily get the best ratings off of it and were usually looking for ways to boost said ratings. One day, in the town of Stamford, Connecticut, the New Warriors discovered a house full of supervillains. Now, these villains were active, they had just recently escaped from prison, but in this house, they weren't doing any supervillainous stuff. They were just living their regular civilian lives. However, the New Warriors thought that this would be a great opportunity not only to catch some villains, but also get it on film. So they attacked unprovoked. Now, far be it from me to say that catching dangerous escaped supervillains is a bad thing, but the New Warriors were cocky, impulsive upstarts, and they attacked without really thinking about the ramifications. This led to a huge battle in the middle of a random neighborhood. Now, one of the villains in this fight was a guy named Nitro. Nitro had the power to generate explosions. Specifically, he could blow himself up and then put himself back together. That was all he could do. He was less of a combatant, he was more just a nuke. During the incredibly chaotic battle, Nitro was knocked across the street from the villain house, where he detonated. In front of an elementary school. Understandably, this triggers...
Oh, that's fucked up. And they screwed up. And that's what started it? Because I'm pretty... why didn't the movie do that? That would have been a hard one.
An immediate nationwide panic around superhumans. While the New Warriors were just idiot kids, all superhumans catch a bunch of heat for this, as the Avengers are seen as making superheroing cool and encouraging, quote, kids wearing tights being able to do whatever they want. People are demanding oversight, and the government's response to this is the Superhuman Registration Act, something that sounds innocuous on the surface, or at least mostly harmless, but it's a bit more than the name would imply. The Superhuman Registration Act didn't just require superhumans to register, it made superheroes federal employees in every way, shape, and form. Under this act, everyone operating as a superhero in the United States would work directly for the government, and this was not something that Steve Rogers wanted to see happen. Knowing his history, his stance makes absolute sense. He does not trust the government to tell the superheroes when and how to act, and he never has. In his own words, superheroes need to stay above that stuff, or Washington starts telling us who the supervillains are. Maria Hill, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, tries to bring Steve on board, but he does not go for it, leading to him having to break out of a helicarrier and hijack a plane. Though it is worth noting that in this moment, when Captain America is now actively anti-government once again, he's still trying his best to be a good guy. On the next page, it says that he landed the plane in a football field, making sure not to damage it, and then took the pilot out to get a burger. Because Captain America is just great. I've said it a lot, and it is becoming no less true as we get closer to modern stuff. Cue the rest of the Civil War event, which weirdly, we actually don't have to spend too much time on narratively. Most of us have a general idea of how it goes. Iron Man sides with the government, Steve Rogers sides against them, both of them amass big teams of superheroes who believe in one philosophy or the other, and they fight. A lot. All of the Civil War event is just a big debate over how much the government can be trusted with great amounts of power, and both Captain America and Iron Man's stances make a lot of sense in context. Tony still feels a lot of guilt over his past involvement with weapons manufacturing and things like that, so he's on the side of giving superhumans more oversight. But Cap, definitely not that. When you know the history of Captain America, especially the arcs that I've talked about in this video today, where he stands on this issue should come as no surprise whatsoever. Yes, there might be some good that's done by the government having control over all the superhumans, but that's not going to last, and it's inevitably going to become corrupted. Whichever stance is right at the end of the day, Steve actually ends up changing his mind first, and thus his side quote-unquote loses the war, but he doesn't change his mind in the way that you might think. As the fights escalate over the course of the comic, it eventually comes to a head in a one-on-one battle between Iron Man and Captain America. Cap wins this fight, but is then tackled by a bunch of civilians. This moment, this time when the civilians themselves get directly involved in the conflict, is enough to give Steve a revelation. Not a revelation that Tony is right.
Goddamn third party of doom, bro, I'm telling you.
But one that says maybe this fight is causing more harm than it is good. The battles in Civil War are really big, and they carry a lot of collateral damage, especially towards the conclusion of the series. It is no longer just a rift between superhumans, it's dividing the entire country in half. And even though Steve has his own opinions on the subject, his loyalty is always going to be to the American people. And this is starting to affect them too much. Innocents are getting hurt, innocents who really should not have any direct stake in this fight, and that's enough to call it. So, Steve turns himself in, and Captain America is arrested. Not because his mind was changed, not because he suddenly trusts the government now, but because he knows that he needs to operate for the greater good, and this has become something very, very far away from that. Whether or not he was correct in doing this is up for debate, and you can draw your own conclusions on it if you want. Superhuman registration was the norm for a while after Civil War, and there's a whole bunch of comics that are directly related to this concept, and they definitely do explore both sides of it. But Steve was not around to see those ramifications. In the wake of Civil War, a captive Steve Rogers was murdered by an assassin, and he would stay dead for several years, with Bucky Barnes taking on the Captain America mantle during his absence. He would be revived several years later in a very weird comic booky way, so strange and largely irrelevant to the topic today that I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to explain it, but I'll give a brief summary. Basically, after he was killed, the government held a fake funeral for Steve with an empty casket, but actually took his body and did experiments on it because they wanted to use it to replicate the super soldier serum. So that explains how his body remained, but the way that his mind remained was some weird, very Doctor Who sounding plot where like his consciousness had become unstuck in time and was reliving moments from his past, and then they were able to do some complicated comic book nonsense and bring him back to reality.
This some JoJo ass fucking, this a Stan type fucking problem that would happen, bro. The fuck are you talking about? By the way, Steel Ball Run is gas. Let that be known.
I'll just put it this way. You hear people talking about Civil War a lot. That's a very culturally relevant comic. You never hear people talking about Captain America Reborn, though, which I think says all that I need to. However, Steve was reborn into another very relevant moment for this video. After the events of Reborn, Steve is given a full presidential pardon for all the stuff that happened in Civil War, but he does not become a government agent. As I've said so many times, he's still not doing that. Actually, he doesn't even take up the shield immediately. He leaves that with Bucky, who is operating as the official Captain America. But he would get back into the field pretty quickly, and for a very valid reason. The next major arc of Captain America is one where he is firmly anti-government again. Actually, he and his allies are directly going against an organization called—
Why do you look like a racist in that picture? Yeah, bro, it kind of looks like a racist, I'm gonna be real.
Captain America is one where he is firmly anti-government again. Actually, he and his allies are directly going against an organization called Hammer, successor to S.H.I.E.L.D. and major American national security group. Why are they fighting Hammer? Well, Hammer is led by Norman Osborn. Yeah, Steve's rebirth happens at a time when Norman Osborn is in charge of a lot of things. In fact, he even has his—
My microphone was off. Look at this lineup, bro. You got the Wolverine, Black Suit Spider-Man, Sentry. That's just normal Iron Man, right? That's not fucking War Machine. Who's the man with the axe? Is that Hawkeye? Who's this nigga on the left? Fucking Vegetable Man or something like that?
Own team of Avengers that he has direct control over. So while this technically counts as a time in which Steve does go against the American government, it's more of a direct supervillain is controlling the government thing, so it's not exactly what I'm talking about in this video. It is definitely worth mentioning though, because I will admit the end of the Siege arc where this storyline takes place is one of the very few times where we do see Steve Rogers actively working for the government again. After the arc where Norman Osborn is ousted, the president offers Norman's former job to Steve, and Steve accepts, becoming a very high-ranking figure in national security. Though it is worth noting that this is kind of closer to his champion status with S.H.I.E.L.D., as he actively says that he's going to do it, quote, his way. But does this mean that Captain America is once again a tool of the government? No, not really, because Steve is not serving in this capacity as Captain America. For some time after this, the main Captain America in the comics was still Bucky Barnes, and Steve, as technically a government operative but really just a superhero guy in the chair type figure, was operating from the sidelines. And that's not an exaggeration either. Steve Rogers was actively a secondary character in the self-titled Captain America series where Bucky was the star. This would be the case for a couple more years until Bucky was killed in action, and in turn, Steve took up his old title once again. This would mark another pretty long status quo for Captain America, at least long by modern comic standards, which is only a couple of years. This period was more or less regular Cap things. Steve Rogers was wearing the classic uniform, he was with the Avengers for a good chunk of the time, he did have his own solo adventures of course, and he had a sort of on-again, off-again relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. When you think of Captain America status quo, this is pretty much it. We're skimming over many storylines here because this video is about a specific part of Cap's history and not just the history of the character as a whole, but I do want to point out that the next big shift came when he lost the Super Soldier Serum. The reason that I bring this up is that this is the reason why Sam Wilson was officially appointed by Steve as the successor to the Captain America role. The affectionately dubbed Foul Cap was the main Captain America for a while, and then Secret Wars happens, and in the wake of Secret Wars 2015, oh boy, now we get to one of the most controversial Captain America stories of all time. After Doctor Doom messed up the entire multiverse, or I guess the Beyonders messed up the entire multiverse and Doctor Doom fixed part of it, whatever, that's a whole other thing. It was eventually returned to normal, and Sam Wilson remained Captain America for a time. Meanwhile, Steve was part of S.H.I.E.L.D. again. This is the period where Steve is like the most government affiliated that we've seen him since the 1950s. He has no super soldier serum, he is an old man, though still a capable one, and he's operating as Commander Rogers of S.H.I.E.L.D. This doesn't last long though, and oh boy does it spiral. We're gonna go kind of fast because, well, you're going to see why. During Steve's time at S.H.I.E.L.D., S.H.I.E.L.D. creates this...
They make it seem like he was like a racist, like he was killing... like he was eating babies or something on some Epstein shit.
Prison, in quotes, called Pleasant Hill, which is one of the most unethical things I've ever seen, though it is treated as such. The point of Pleasant Hill is that it's a town, like a normal American stereotypical white picket fences town, and this town is populated by supervillains who have been reality warped by the Cosmic Cube. It is essentially identity erasure super mind control prison, and in fairness, Steve not only had nothing to do with it being formed, when he finds out about it from Maria Hill, he is strongly against the entire thing and orders it to be dismantled immediately. But it doesn't get to that point, because it was a mind control prison full of a bunch of supervillains. It went how you thought it would, and the prisoners did break out. So Pleasant Hill is gone fairly quickly after its formation. The reason that I have to mention it at all is the Cosmic Cube that it introduced. The Cosmic Cube is not just a normal reality warping artifact in this case, it is sentient. It has taken the form of a little girl named Kobik, and Kobik is basically a god. After the Pleasant Hill breakout, Captain America is attacked and damn near killed by Crossbones, but Kobik saves his life, and she does this by reality warping him back to a healthy state, which also includes the Super Soldier Serum, so Steve is back in Captain America fighting form again, and he takes up the shield. And just remember that this happened, and it happened because of a weird little reality warping child. We're gonna pivot away from it for a second, but we're going to come back to it very quickly. Though I'm not going to make any pretense at hiding where exactly this is going. A lot of you have probably seen this panel here, this panel where Captain America says Hail Hydra, and like he's not being ironic, he's being genuine about it. Yeah, we're here. This was the start of an event called Secret Empire. Yes, a while ago in this video, there was an organization called Secret Empire. This is the name of a series, and it's a related but different thing. This comic did something absolutely insane by retconning Captain America's origin and saying that he was actually always a Hydra sleeper agent. There was this whole thing where his mother was recruited by Hydra and then he was raised in that and sort of subtly indoctrinated, and now, just now, was the time that Hydra decided to activate him for their own ends. In the comics, this status quo lasted for several issues, and was radically unpopular, so I'm not going to string you along, and I'm just going to get to the point. This was a reality-warped Captain America. Kobik was a child, and she was so naive that she had been secretly indoctrinated by Hydra operatives while she was in the custody of S.H.I.E.L.D. So when she rewrote Captain America, she also rewrote his history. The retcon was canon, essentially. It was a change. Now, as a high-ranking member of Hydra leadership, Steve and his armies take over the United States. Like, they succeed in this. Hydra openly rules the nation now. But then, of course, some fragment of the original Steve Rogers remained, and we do get to see this pretty cool panel of Steve punching out a fascist version of himself. Once again, kind of like the Norman Osborn thing, does this really count as Steve Rogers going against the American government in the way that I'm meaning it for this video? I mean, kind of. It was more of a direct supervillain takeover than anything else, but hey, if you ever wanted to see Steve Rogers just actively fighting a fascist takeover of the government, here's him doing it, so there can be no question that he would if that situation ever happened again. Then, in the aftermath of this, they kind of just do the original Secret Empire arc again, almost shot for shot. There's a new villain group spinning out of Hydra called the Power Elite, and they frame Steve Rogers for murder, and then he decides that the mantle of Captain America is tarnished, so he retires it and fights under a different identity. And then, after fighting like this for a time, he decides that the Captain America is worth it for the symbology, and that he's going to—
Holy shit, Cap, I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna be real, gang. You keep changing your mind about it. At this point, just stick to Captain America. Bro keeps saying, I don't want to be Captain America. I'm being Captain America. I don't want to be Captain America. I'm gonna be Captain America, I guess. Like, bro, make up your mind.
Try to uphold the ideals in a way that is worthy, and so he becomes Captain America again. It really is just kind of the same thing that we talked about half an hour ago. But now we move into one that actually really matters for the theming again. We had a lot of those back in the early classic Captain America days, then it became kind of off and on, but in one of the more recent Captain America books, titled Captain America Sentinel of Liberty, the themes really return to the surface, and that's why I wanted to end there. In this era, which is very recent, this comic was released in 2022, there are two Captain Americas. Now, that in and of itself is not that weird. What's important is that there were two Captain Americas with their own self-titled books. Captain America Sentinel of Liberty, which was about Steve Rogers, and Captain America Symbol of Truth, which was about Sam Wilson. We're going to be focusing on Sentinel of Liberty today because this video is mostly about Steve. In this comic, he is not fighting the government directly. I mean, there are some implications that we're going to get to in a minute, but regardless of who exactly he's going up against, the symbolism is abundantly clear. The first villains of Sentinel of Liberty are a group known as the Outer Circle. At their core concept, they are your standard Illuminati type organization, but I think the way that they're written is actually pretty cool and interesting. The Outer Circle was formed in the wake of World War I by a group of few very powerful individuals who believed that the common people were not worthy to lead themselves. This is where the whole government implication starts to come in. The Circle has been operating for quite some time, and in this comic it explicitly states that not only have they orchestrated some global events like World War II and the formation of the International Space Station, they also have a lot of power in specifically American government, which includes orchestrating elections of US presidents. Again, it's Illuminati, but it's Illuminati with very clear symbolism. There's another aspect of them that I'm holding for a minute for dramatic purposes, but we're gonna get there. There are 5 core members of the Outer Circle, each operating under code names. They are the Power, the Machine, the Money, and the Love, with the 5th member being
I'm not gonna lie, those are hard. The Power, the Machine, the Money, the Love. That is hard, bro. I'm not gonna lie.
a little bit different. Their last member is Gavrilo Princip, a name that probably doesn't ring a bell for a lot of you, but history nerds in the audience just whipped around to look at their screen very confused, because that is the name of the real-world historical figure who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Yeah, I told you there
What?
was going to be political stuff in this comic, and I was not kidding about that. This character is one of the guys who started the actual World War I, and apparently in the Marvel Universe, after this, he was rescued by a supervillain, and they went on to found the Illuminati. However, Gavrilo's role is different, and it's his inclusion that actually makes the group interesting. His codename is the Revolution, and his job is to destroy the Circle. The Outer Circle views everything that they do as one gigantic game, and to make the game fair, they put a double agent in their own ranks. Revolution's role is not a secret. Everybody knows that he's ultimately working against them, but that's just one player on equal footing that they have to work against. I really like this concept. I think that's a super neat twist on the whole Illuminati trope, and this is a little bit of a spoiler for this comic, so you've been warned now, but Bucky Barnes ends up succeeding him as the Revolution, and that's where the Marvel Rivals skin comes from.
Okay, for one, okay. You didn't need to point that out, that's the skin, because I did jump when I saw that. Okay, so he's the next. Oh, that's crazy.
Him as the Revolution, and that's where the Marvel Rivals skin comes from. Now, we've talked about the Outer Circle and its 5 core components. If you've really got some major spatial reasoning going on in your head, or, you've read this comic book before, that might sound kind of familiar to you. An outer circle surrounding 5 components. What else looks like that? This is where the symbolism kicks in, because Captain America's Sentinel of Liberty finally tackles one of the greatest mysteries in the history of Steve Rogers. How exactly does that shield work? Yeah, you heard me right. Captain America's iconic shield is actually a mystery. We know parts of it, it's been connected to various Marvel super metals over the years, but all the way back to its first appearance, no one knew how exactly it was made. Its unique indestructibility comes from, quote, a metallurgical accident. Sentinel of Liberty fills in that nearly century-old gap by establishing that this accident was no accident at all, and this specific vibranium alloy was intentionally created by someone affiliated with the Outer Circle. Though I use the term affiliated with rather than part of for very good reason, as this man was Dr. Boka Agboje.
Sorry, y'all, I'm not talking. I'm actually interested in this because Cap's lore actually goes deeper than I thought it did.
Son of the Machine, one of the Outer Circle's core members. While the shield was made with the Outer Circle's blessing, their symbol being upon it was not. Agboje had lost faith in the organization and put their symbol openly on the shield of Captain America in hopes that their sign being in public would drag the group into the light. This was, of course, unsuccessful for quite some time. Their symbol being out in the open did not expose the Outer Circle, and in fact, it might have only strengthened their position. That symbol became iconic. When people looked at it, they saw truth, they saw hope, they saw Captain America, and the Outer Circle was just fine with that, because they hadn't lost any of their actual power. If people looked upon their sacred sign and felt happiness because of it, well then that made them more blind to what was actually going on. The symbolism in this, it's good. Sentinel of Liberty is a damn good comic book. It was not the first time that the iconography of Captain America had been tainted by corruption, but this one looked at that in a new light. The old Captain America comics, for better or for worse, like to glamorize the older days of America. Sure, Steve is very aware and very against corruption that's happening in the modern day, but he looks back at the era of World War II quite positively, not because of the chaos and violence happening during that time, of course, but because from his perspective, America was objectively in the right. Now, Sentinel of Liberty is not contesting America's stance during World War II. It is by no means saying that fighting the Nazis was a bad thing, but what it does bring up is the fact that maybe the good things that the nation does don't necessarily cover the bad. In fact, having read and thoroughly enjoyed this comic just recently, I will pretty openly call it a direct shot at the philosophy of making America great again. Rewinding to the past is not going to fix any problems. It might shift what those problems are, but it's not going to get rid of them. That shield is always going to have baggage to it, and pretending that it doesn't is not going to make that suddenly go away. But while this might sound kind of depressing at first, the comic handles it really well by moving in a different direction than the previous arcs have. This time around, Steve keeps that shield. He does not go and become Nomad or the Captain or anything like that. He holds true to that symbol, because while he acknowledges that it does have some negative history behind it, it also has positive. Look at this panel. This one is actually not from Sentinel of Liberty specifically, but it is one of my favorite Cap panels because of how simple it is, and I think it very much applies. Captain America is loyal to the dream. Not the American government, not the American politicians, not the American laws or wars. He is loyal to the American ideals. Equality, freedom, basic human dignity, all of these things are what that shield stands for. And look, this video, which is, coming up on an hour now? This has only been the top notes. There's a lot more that I can talk about, and hey, let's go through a quick little rapid-fire slideshow while we're here. Steve Rogers openly condemning supremacist groups. Steve Rogers actively forming a team to give mutants fair representation in the eyes of the people. Steve Rogers telling people that they shouldn't hate others based on their race or how they look or how they dress. Steve Rogers, oh, this is a big one actually, we're gonna spend a minute on this one. Steve Rogers, the son of immigrants by the way, that's 100% canon, telling a supervillain that America should not be xenophobic because it's for all religions, all nationalities, and all of those want the same thing, to see their children grow strong, to provide safety for their families, to live in quiet times, and to have peace. All of this is what that shield stands for. It is absolutely a symbol of American patriotism, but that patriotism is not blind. This symbol, this character, is the good in America, despite those who would try to oppress it or twist it for their own ends. And that good always remains. It might be very buried and difficult to see at times, but it's there, and it's worth fighting for. Now look, there's a lot of very good Captain America speeches in these recent comics, but as we come to the conclusion of this video, I'd actually like to return to an older one that I brought up earlier, specifically the speech in Captain America 332 where he gives up the shield. In this speech, he says that, quote, "My commitment to the ideals of this country is greater than my commitment to a 40-year-old document." Now, the document that he's referencing there is his own contract, but I'm going to extend that a little bit in a way that I think Steve would approve of. Commitment to the ideals of this country, the good within it, and the things that it was made to stand for should be greater than your commitment to any piece of paper. I don't care what that paper is, an employment contract, an unjust law or order, immigration papers maybe, no matter what it is, no matter where it comes from or who it comes from, there is never, under any circumstances, a document that can invalidate someone's basic right to dignity in this country. And all of that can wrap up into a pretty damn good thesis statement to conclude this entire video. Those ideals, those simple ideals of dignity and freedom and equality for anyone and everyone, those are Captain America. Those are the things that this country was made to stand on, and if anybody tries to tell you differently, regardless of how much power they might have, they are standing on the wrong side of the shield. Whew, boy, okay. Thank you all so much for watching. That was quite a video to make. I'm sure that some people are going to be quite mad at me about it, and to those people, watch it again and maybe you'll learn something. I'm not going to spend a lot of time plugging myself because it seems kind of disingenuous given the message, but this is also my full-time job, so I'll just be quick. I have a Patreon. You can find it if you want. I'd appreciate it. What is a good and American thing for me to do is give credit where credit is due, and so shout out to my artist, Ruben Perez, who drew all the poses of the character that you've been watching talk at you for the last hour. There were new poses in this one. Funny enough, a lot of the new poses that I got were kind of like silly ones, and this video had less opportunities for silly ones, but you will see them more in future things. But with that aside, we'll keep the conclusion very quick. I've said all I needed to and quoted Steve Rogers enough that I'm quite happy. The message is pretty clear, so I will end with one final call to action. To all my American viewers, and beyond, I suppose, things are getting crazy out there, and as they continue to escalate, well, I've shown you where the shield is. Make sure you're on the right side of it. A quote from Steve Rogers, Captain America.
Hold on. That was low-key louch back. My mouse isn't working. Hold on, be right back. Alright, hold on a second. Put that there. There you go. Anyway, that was amazing, bro. I didn't know Captain America was that deep to be so real. I've only seen like the MCUs and stuff like that. I didn't think that like that boy Captain America doesn't like. I can see why completely now. He had the like, he was able to hold Mjolnir. Hopefully, I didn't butcher that. But I can see why, bro. Bro's a pure heart. Bro only wants what's good, and I finally understand why the Civil War happened without having to just agree with Iron Man because it's Iron Man. But that's about it, y'all. I'm gonna probably go play Cap later. But I'll see y'all later. Like, sub, and all that jazz. Peace.